Welcome to Stream History. Today we are dissecting the unrelenting four-year marathon of James K. Polk. We will trace how his rigid, four-point legislative agenda forced the Republic to expand, altering the global balance of power forever. The ultimate chief executive, James K. Polk's ruthless blueprint for an empire. History often remembers the flamboyant, the tragic, and the overtly revolutionary. Yet, tucked away in the 1840s is a figure who accomplished more in a single, grueling four-year term than most achieved in a lifetime. James K. Polk, an intense, sleep-deprived workaholic, did not just govern. He actively reshaped the geopolitical reality of North America. Through a blend of brilliant diplomatic brinkmanship and calculated warfare, Polk annexed over 1 million square miles of territory. He drove the North American continent to expand, pushing his own body to the absolute brink of destruction to redraw borders and cement the United States as a continental titan. To understand the sheer magnitude of Polk's presidency, we must first transport ourselves to the chaotic political landscape of 1844. The Democratic Party was fractured, and the leading candidate, former President Martin Van Buren, was paralyzed by his opposition to the annexation of Texas. Enter James K. Polk of Tennessee. He was a quintessential dark horse, the first of his kind in American political history. A former Speaker of the House and a protege of Andrew Jackson, Polk was not the initial choice, but he was the perfect compromise. Polk campaigned on a platform that was as bold as it was unapologetic. He recognized that the American electorate was hungry for growth, stability, and a definitive end to the political stagnation that had plagued the Tyler administration. But Polk did something unprecedented. He made a binding public promise. He vowed to serve only a single term. By taking this extraordinary vow, Polk liberated himself from the paralyzing demands of partisan re-election politics. He was not looking to build a coalition for a second term. He was looking to execute a rigid, unapologetic vision for the country. This single-term pledge transformed him from a typical politician into a hyper-focused, deadline-driven chief executive. He approached the presidency not as a popularity contest, but as a corporate boardroom where ambitious metrics had to be met. His mandate was clear, and his timeline was non-negotiable. Upon taking the oath of office, Polk did not waste a single day. He established a staggering agenda consisting of exactly 4 core objectives. These were not mere campaign slogans. They were the rigid pillars of his administration, each designed to shift the United States from a disjointed collection of states into a contiguous, transcontinental empire. The first pillar was lowering the tariff. Polk believed in a strict agrarian economic vision and opposed the heavy protectionist tariffs championed by northern industrial interests. He tasked his administration with passing the Walker Tariff of 1846. This legislation drastically slashed rates, replacing protective tariffs with revenue-based ones. It was a fiercely contested political battle, but Polk's iron will and tight party discipline saw it through, opening American markets to freer trade and unifying the agrarian South and West behind his administration. The second pillar was restoring the independent Treasury. Since the destruction of the Second Bank of the United States under Andrew Jackson, the federal government's funds have been scattered in various state banks. Polk sought to create an independent treasury system, a completely separate vault controlled strictly by the government to hold federal funds. This was a massive shift in economic philosophy that ensured the federal government had absolute control over its own fiscal destiny, free from the corrupting influence of Wall Street or speculative private banks. The third pillar was the re-annexation of Texas. Texas had won its independence from Mexico in 1836 and had been clamoring for annexation ever since. Previous administrations had hesitated, fearing war with Mexico and domestic disputes over the expansion of slavery. Polk, however, viewed Texas as an essential piece of the continental puzzle. In the waning days of the Tyler administration, Congress passed a joint resolution to annex Texas, but it was Polk who officially oversaw its incorporation into the United States in December 1845, setting the stage for a massive geopolitical collision with Mexico. The fourth pillar was the acquisition of California. Polk recognized that if the United States was to become a true global player, it needed deep-water ports on the Pacific Ocean. He cast his gaze upon California, which was then a sparsely populated province of Mexico. Polk wanted it, and he was prepared to do whatever it took to get it. These four pillars required a culture of unrelenting productivity. Polk was a micromanager of the highest order. He involved himself in the minutiae of government operations, demanding regular reports, reviewing appointments with a fine-toothed comb, and setting a grueling pace for his cabinet. This relentless, hyper-focused work ethic was the driving force behind his success. He did not delegate, he directed. He did not accept delays, he forced progress. This was the blueprint that defined his path into the White House and fueled his unyielding drive. With the domestic machinery in motion, Polk turned his attention to the international stage. His foreign policy was defined by a bold, uncompromising approach to territorial acquisition. He refused to accept the status quo, and his primary target in the early days of his administration was the Pacific Northwest. At the time, the Oregon Territory was jointly occupied by the United States and Great Britain. For decades, politicians have been content to kick the can down the road, sharing the vast wilderness. But Polk was not a man for sharing. During the 1844 campaign, expansionist Democrats popularized the slogan 54-40 or fight. This referred to the northern latitude of 54 degrees 40 minutes, the boundary they claimed for the Oregon Territory. To accept anything less, they argued, was a betrayal of American destiny. Polk adopted this aggressive stance, using it as a brilliant diplomatic lever against the British Empire. He formally notified the British that he was terminating the Joint Occupation Agreement. He then offered a compromise at the 49th parallel, which the British initially rejected. Polk did not back down. He continued to posture, allowing tensions to rise and convincing the British that the United States was genuinely prepared to go to war over a patch of wilderness. This was a high-stakes game of geopolitical poker. Polk knew that fighting both Great Britain and Mexico simultaneously would be disastrous for the young republic. Yet, his willingness to project absolute certainty and aggression forced the British to the negotiating table. Ultimately, cool heads prevailed, and the Oregon Treaty of 1846 was signed, establishing the 49th parallel as the border. Polk had secured vital Pacific ports and solidified the northwestern flank, successfully utilizing the art of brinkmanship to get exactly what he wanted without firing a single shot. With the northern border secured, Polk was now free to shift his undivided attention to the southern border. If Polk's diplomacy in Oregon was a masterclass in bluffing, his handling of the Mexican-American War was a masterclass in calculated provocation. The annexation of Texas had immediately strained relations with Mexico. Mexico had never formally recognized Texas's independence, let alone its annexation by the United States. Furthermore, there was a bitter dispute over the southern border of Texas. The United States claimed the border was the Rio Grande, while Mexico insisted it was the Nueces River, roughly 150 miles to the north. Polk, viewing California and the vast southwestern territories as his ultimate prize, decided to force the issue. In early 1846, he ordered General Zachary Taylor to march his troops into the disputed territory between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. This was not a defensive maneuver. It was a deliberate act of provocation designed to elicit a Mexican military response. Polk knew exactly what he was doing. He was baiting the Mexican army into firing the first shot, which he could then use as a righteous justification for a full-scale war. The strategy worked perfectly. In April 1846, Mexican forces crossed the Rio Grande and attacked a detachment of American dragoons. Polk had his casus belli. He immediately drafted a war message to Congress, declaring that Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. Congress overwhelmingly approved the declaration of war, and the United States was plunged into a continental conflict. The Mexican-American War was a masterclass in logistical ingenuity and military planning. Polk and his Secretary of War, William L. Marcy, oversaw a complex multi-front campaign. They orchestrated a daring amphibious assault on Veracruz, led by General Winfield Scott, which paved the way for a grueling march to Mexico City. Simultaneously, American forces secured California and New Mexico. However, this was also a conflict fraught with moral controversy. Many critics, including a young Illinois congressman named Abraham Lincoln, accused Polk of initiating an unjust, aggressive war of conquest. They saw it as an immoral land grab designed to expand the institution of slavery. Yet, from Polk's perspective, this aggressive expansion was the physical embodiment of manifest destiny, the widely held belief that American settlers were divinely ordained to expand across the North American continent. To Polk, the ends more than justified the means. He was not merely fighting a war for pride. He was executing a grand strategic vision to unite the continent under the American flag. The culmination of Polk's ruthless ambition came in early 1848 with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty effectively ended the Mexican-American War and resulted in one of the largest single land transfers in human history. Under the terms of the treaty, Mexico ceded nearly half of its territory to the United States in exchange for $15 million. This massive expanse of land, known as the Mexican Cession, included the present-day states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. When combined with the annexation of Texas and the settlement of the Oregon Territory, Polk had successfully added over 1 million square miles to the United States. The map of North America had been irrevocably altered. The geopolitical implications of this expansion were immediate and profound. The United States now spanned from the Atlantic to the Pacific, giving the young republic a commanding presence in both oceans. Just months after the treaty was signed, gold was discovered in California. The acquisition of this Pacific territory instantly transformed the United States from an agrarian, developing nation on the periphery of the world stage into an emerging global superpower. California's deepwater ports, such as San Francisco, opened up lucrative trade routes with Asia, while the immense wealth generated by the gold rush fueled the American industrial engine. Polk had taken the continental ambitions of his predecessors and turned them into reality. He had achieved every single goal on his four-point agenda. He had secured the Northwest, conquered the Southwest, reformed the national economy, and established the United States as a dominant hemispheric power. By sheer force of will, he had redrawn the map of North America, creating the borders that define the modern United States today. The vast geopolitical triumphs of the Polk presidency did not come without an astronomical personal cost. Polk's approach to the presidency was all-consuming. He viewed himself as the ultimate servant of the American people, operating under the assumption that he alone was capable of managing the complex machinery of the executive branch. Throughout his entire four-year term, Polk refused to take a single vacation. He rarely left Washington, D.C., and when he did, it was usually for short, business-related trips. He worked 18-hour days, obsessing over the smallest details of governance, from military logistics to minor political appointments. He did not trust his cabinet to handle affairs without his constant oversight, and as a result, he became the engine that drove the entire administration. This relentless pace exacted a brutal physiological toll. Polk's refusal to delegate or rest meant that he was constantly running on adrenaline and caffeine, carrying the weight of a continental war and massive territorial negotiations on his own shoulders. By the time his term neared its end in 1849, the presidency had visibly ravaged his health. He was physically exhausted, gaunt, and susceptible to the illnesses that plagued the swampy, unsanitary capital. On March 4th, 1849, a weary and depleted Polk handed the reins of power over to his successor, Zachary Taylor. He was only 53 years old, but he looked like a man in his 70s. Polk had survived the presidency, but the presidency had extracted the ultimate prize from his body. He retired to his newly purchased estate, Polk Place, in Nashville, Tennessee, hoping to finally enjoy the quiet life he had long postponed. However, his retirement was tragically short-lived. Just 3 months after leaving the White House, in June 1849, Polk contracted cholera during a trip through the American South. His body, already completely drained of vitality and stripped of its natural defenses by 4 years of unrelenting stress, was unable to fight off the disease. On June 15, 1849, James K. Polk passed away. His final words reflected the exhaustion that had defined his presidency. "I love you, Sarah. For all eternity, I love you." He died without ever enjoying the fruits of his monumental labors. As we look back at the legacy of James K. Polk, history presents us with a complex and deeply polarizing figure. On one hand, Polk is undeniably one of the most effective and consequential presidents in American history. He stands as a testament to what a hyper-focused, determined leader can achieve. He made bold promises and fulfilled every single one of them. He expanded the nation's borders by over 1 million square miles, secured Pacific ports that propelled the United States onto the global stage, and executed a masterful geopolitical strategy that few thought possible. Through diplomatic brinkmanship in Oregon and calculated warfare in Mexico, Polk forged a contiguous, transcontinental empire. He took the esoteric concept of manifest destiny and turned it into a tangible, permanent reality. Under his watch, the United States ceased to be a fragile union of coastal states and transformed into an emerging global superpower. Yet, this monumental achievement is forever inextricably linked to a dark and tragic legacy. The very expansion that Polk championed was the catalyst for the defining crisis of the American Republic, the Civil War. By acquiring vast new territories in the West, Polk reignited the bitter, volatile debate over the expansion of slavery into these new lands. The Wilmot Proviso, which sought to ban slavery in the newly acquired Mexican cession, created a massive political rift that tore the fragile national compromise apart. Politicians and historians have long debated whether Polk's strict, aggressive work ethic saved the nation's future by establishing its rightful continental boundaries, or if it recklessly sowed the seeds of the American Civil War by forcing the slavery question to the forefront. By aggressively pushing the boundaries of the country, Polk inadvertently accelerated the sectional crisis. The new territories became a battleground between free and slave states, ultimately leading to the bloodshed of the 1860s. Polk did not live to see the fracturing of the Union he had worked so tirelessly to expand. He sacrificed his own health and his life on the altar of American ambition, driven by a belief that the nation's destiny required immediate, uncompromising action. He was a man who lived by a rigid moral code of duty and hard work, viewing his presidency as a sacred mission to secure the continent for future generations. James K. Polk remains the ultimate paradox of American history. He was a man of the people who operated with the cold efficiency of a corporate CEO. He was a slaveholder who expanded the free territories of the West. He was a diplomat who bluffed empires and a commander-in-chief who engineered a foreign war. Whether viewed as an architect of American greatness or the harbinger of its greatest tragedy, Polk's impact is undeniable. He permanently altered the geopolitical map of North America, and in doing so, he forever changed the trajectory of human history. Thank you for joining us on Stream History for this deep dive into the unrelenting 4-year marathon of James K. Polk. We hope you enjoyed this journey into the mind of a workaholic president who shaped the modern world. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of Stream History. Until next time, keep exploring the past